Well, 2020 hasn't necessarily been the greatest year, and I mean, we're coming into the final 3 months, and I've only been wowed maybe a couple times this year, so maybe we'll get lucky with this one.
I'd almost say stupid, but they can be amazing.
Transitus by Ayreon. So, Transitus is the 10th studio album, depending on how you look at it. The big thing about Ayreon is he conglomerates a whole bunch of working artists from the progressive metal scene. And he did this very successfully on Into the Electric Castle, released in 1998. He had a lot of really prominent figures in the progressive rock and progressive metal scene. The biggest one that I know was Fish. Oh yeah, I need to review his latest album. Anyway, the same thing with on the Universal Migrator, where he got Neil Morse on it. My favorite, and one of my favorite albums to this day, is still The Human Equation, released in 2004. And this is where he got Michael Eichelfeld from Opeth. He got James LeBray from Dream Theater. He got Heavy Devi, Devin Townsend on that one as well, and Heather Findlay. And the thing outside of just getting all these different personalities in on one project, kind of like Jesus Christ Superstar, was the overall story. And it's always a double concept album. And so it's the storyline and how the story influences the music and how the music influences the storyline and how it's all brought together into a very unifying theme and a unifying whole. The first album from him that I actually listened to was 01011001, which I'm still very excited for the fact that I know how to pronounce that and know how to bring it out. At that point, I didn't realize the whole mythos, the whole reasoning behind his albums. And I still love that album. That's still one of my favorite albums from him. The Human Equation, though, by far is still my favorite. Like, all time, that was the second album I listened from him, and I just got blown away for how brilliant it all was and how it all worked. Now, from there, it's kind of been hit and miss. The Theory of Everything, I still love. Like, it's a very proggy piece. It's his most progressive piece to this day. 4 songs, 4 album sides, just balls to the wall, progressive rock. The Source, released 2017, was his last album. From The Source, he did a bunch of live stuff. So he did the Theater Equation, he did the Electric Castle and Other Tales, and he did Ayreon Universe, the Best of Ayreon Live. And all these kind of helped kind of bring his work to life in a live setting, which he hadn't really done up until that point. And as I mentioned, The Source wasn't necessarily my favorite album from his. So now we come to Transitus, the latest album from him, and okay. Let's talk about the story first. Let's talk about, the presentation and all the things kind of surrounding the album. It's very gothic. And I don't necessarily just mean gothic in the terms of like atmospheric, looming giant castles way out in the middle of the countryside, but we're looking more gothic in more of like a Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights, like the Bronte sisters type of a gothic tale. The biggest comparison that I can think of is actually Crimson Peak, the Guillermo del Toro film. That's actually a really, really good comparison to this piece. We've got the story of this, 1800s kind of upper society individuals to lower societies, the help, and it's really interesting that at no point, even though it's very, very, very insinuated, it's never really termed about ethnicity, and I think that's on purpose, of the upper class and the lower class, the masters and there's almost a pause when the narrator says, and the servants, and I'm like, yeah, well, it's probably slave. You could say slave, it's okay. But I mean, it's the 1800s, right? And that didn't necessarily, it was a kind of a thing back then, So, yeah, so you've got, the at the end of the day, this is a love story. It's between Daniel and Abby. And Abby, is one of the servants, and Daniel being the son of this really wealthy lord figure. So Daniel, of course, got stuck because he's flirting with the help. He's flirting with the staff, and that's a no-no. You can't do that. Bad on him. So dude gets dead, and Transitus is essentially purgatory. I mean, it's interesting that they decided to go with Transitus outside of the fact that it's very Latin, it's very epic, it's very But I mean, it is the traditional Western Catholic name for purgatory. It's, the transition between life and death, and the small period of time you have in that in between stage. So it's interesting that he chose Transitus in that sense. And so because of this, you kind of go through the story to unravel the threads. It's following not only Daniel's search for who done it, and why it happened, and you're also following Abby as she's getting flung the accusations that she's the one that did it. She feels the guilt about doing it. I mean, heck, one of the first lines is, "I'm guilty, I did it." So yeah, in that sense, that's kind of where the whole who done it is coming from. And then the story works out, and you've got other characters like the father figure, the brother, the father figure on both sides of the equation, the siblings, the stepmothers. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get into the actual list of characters and who voices each one. So in that sense, that's kind of the story. And oh yeah, Daniel is visited by the angel of death, and she's probably my favorite character out of all of them. And again, I'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, so overall, like, the music itself does lend itself well to this atmosphere. But yeah, that's kind of where the album falters for me. I mean, you do have some of the more gothic aspects of the album with these big grand choruses, very prestigious organ work from time to time. Like, I'm surprised it's not used more so within this very gothic sense. Another big comparison that I can think of is like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra with their two albums, The Night Castle and Letters from the Labyrinth. And again, it's a very good comparison because both of those albums, and even Crimson Peak, the movie, I could see what was attempted, and I can see what they were trying to get at, but didn't quite work. It didn't quite land properly in my mind. Like, I can see where it was going to go. It just didn't work. And that probably goes to like the biggest weakness of this album, and the biggest constraint that I think this album is put under, and that is the track lengths. No track is longer than 5 minutes and 20 seconds. And that is if you're taking into consideration that first suite is, a whole bunch of tracks broken up. Otherwise, that's the longest track at 10 minutes. And even that, I feel like it's very disjointed, and it doesn't quite work as a single piece of music. And again, that's the biggest weakness, because one of my favorite things that Ayreon does is have these longer stretches of music and allows these artists to come in, put in their own little flair and personality, and allow this really fantastic jam session in this big epic setting. And I felt like with this setting that we have on Transitus, it would have provided a brilliant arena for these sounds and noises and abilities to craft such brilliant musical suites. Unfortunately, that's not found on this. Like, all the tracks are very bite-sized, and I don't really get any points to get into them. And it really draws me out, because when I'm starting to really get into the groove and get into the ebb and flow of these tracks, they end. And that was always one of my biggest gripes that I have with the musical scene overall. And one of the main reasons why I went to progressive rock is because they allowed themselves that extra legroom needed to get into the tracks. And when that's one of the biggest flaws of this album, it really suffers for that. Like, the two tracks that have really big guest star musicians on this, I'm not just talking about vocalists and lyricists. We have Get Out Now, which features Joe Satriani, and his guitar work is good, but I do feel like it's a very generic progressive metal guitar work. Like, at no point do I ever really feel like it's a Satchman feel to it. I feel like it's much more of like a studio feeling. And just to kind of pair that off, Message from Beyond, which has Marty Friedman from Megadeth, it actually has his flavor, his staple, his stamp of approval on that. So I can actually feel Marty's signature on that piece when it comes to that big play out that he does on that track, because Message from Beyond is one of my favorite tracks off this album. It is one of the longer pieces, so there gets that for that. But yeah, because it starts off very somber, very heartfelt, and that really has something to do with Amanda Summerfield and Cammie Gilbert. And again, I want to talk about these two in a little bit, but their vocal works and singing styles is just brilliant and beautiful, and I feel like their talents are really used well on this particular piece, and then as this really brilliant ending with Marty providing the guitar work on that. So in that sense, it's a very well constructed single, but not a good progressive rock track in a concept album. And the same can be said with Get Out Now. And I mean, while we're here, we might as well talk. This is the track that Dee Snider from Twisted Sister is on. What am I trying to say here? This song feels like it's written for Dee. It does feel like a Twisted Sister track that was written for the 2000s. So in that sense, it feels 15 to 20 years old. And I mean, Twisted Sister was a big 80s rock. It was a really fantastic 80s hair metal, hair glam outfit. And when we have Dee on here and he's got that chorus work with... you don't mix with the staff. You don't get along. You don't have a thing about protocol. I'm just like, wow, that's definitely a Twisted Sisters lyric right there. Oof, oof. And I mean, it works, but on the same hand, it doesn't, because it's the only track that really stands out in being this. And I can tell like he's having fun, right? I can tell like he and Arjen are definitely having a blast in the recording studio, but does it make for a good listening experience at the end of the day? In one sense, it kind of does. Like, it is a fun track, and it's one of the highlights. Like, this one, Messages from Beyond. These ones are probably the biggest tracks off of this album, if I'm being perfectly honest. And, oh boy, while we're here, let's talk about Old Friend and Dumb Piece of Rock. So, if there was ever anything that could have been kind of hacked and slashed and took out from the story, it's these tracks. Oh boy. Yeah, when Old Friend came on, and the narrator is talking about how Daniel used to talk to this old Roman statue. And I'm like, please let him come to life and sing. Please let him come to life and sing. The cheese would be off the scale if that were to happen. And then, of course, the narrator's like, who could have seen this happening? He's coming to life and sing. And I'm like, yay! It was just so beyond stupid. I really have to say, it was beyond stupid. Now, I will admit the track is catchy, the track bangs, but oh boy, yeah. If they had worked it into the story in some way that he could interact with inanimate objects as this ghost figure, then it would have made sense, and he could have had a little bit more fun in this like haunted castle kind of an idea, but that wasn't what we found on here. It's like a one-off, what the hell? So, yeah, that was a little strange. And this probably would be a good opportunity to actually talk about, the music doesn't really fit the story that's going on here. Like, it does every once in a while. And as I mentioned, the big choruses, the big gothic atmosphere does. But, like, it does, like, the music feels like an Ayreon soundtrack. Like, if you took anything from The Source or The Theory of Everything and you're basically listening to this album, like, it doesn't feel like its own independent work, Like, The Human Equation and The Universal Migrator and Into the Electric Castle and 01, they all had their distinct feeling. They all had their distinct identity. But then it did kind of solidify the whole Ayreon TM feel from that, because once we got into The Source, it felt very derivative, it felt very repetitive, it felt very of its, like, it didn't have its own personality, and it definitely doubled down on this one, because this one doesn't feel like it has its own personality at all, which is really a shame, because the atmosphere of this lends itself perfectly. Like, this was released at the end of September, right? So we're right into the fall season, we're right into the Halloween season. I wanted to have those big haunting organ works. I want that really atmospheric feelings. I wanted a Halloween fall album, and I got generic Ayreon. And so the music very rarely matches what's actually going on in the storyline. Like, when Abby's trapped in this burning house, I don't feel it musically. When Daniel is talking to the Angel of Death, I don't feel it musically. Heck, when the only time when it really does feel that way is when Daniel is talking with his father, and that's mainly just Dee Schnidering it up. That's the only time I'm really feeling it. I just realized there's a little bit of fluff on there. I don't really feel it anywhere else in the album, and it really takes me out of the album as a whole. All right, so let's talk about some of the talent. Let's talk about some of the people on here. Simon Simmons plays the Angel of Death. She's coming from Epica, and this is not her first foray with Ayreon. She's like a tenure at this point. Same with Tommy Kravec from Camelot and Seventh Wonder. These two individuals, they've been with Ayreon many times, and both of them do a fantastic job given the material that they're given. I mean, Simone will always sound brilliant. She'll always sound fantastic, no matter what she's singing. Same with Tommy. But I also don't really feel their personality of the characters. Like Simone playing the Angel of Death, she comes on, and my favorite part is whenever she kind of takes a sidestep and is always like, nice. It does get a little bit grating every once in a while, but at least, she's doing something different with the character. Tommy, though, like, he's getting lost in the shuffle. I really have to be honest. Like, outside of belting it out at the beginning couple of tracks where he's just like, why? It doesn't really add anything else to that. Now, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge the narrator. I've been calling him the narrator up until this point, but, like, the fourth Doctor Who is on this. Tom Baker, my man, is on there. Even though Sylvester's still one of my favorite classic Doctors, and, David Tennant is still my favorite Doctor, period. But yeah, Sylvester's my favorite old Doctor, so Tom does a brilliant job on this. Like, if there was a superstar off of this album, it's Tom Baker. His ability to narrate and storytell is brilliant. I mean, that's coming with just years and years and years of experience behind him. So his ability to really craft the story was what kept me engaged when the music wasn't getting me into it. From there, I really have to, shout out more of a diverse cast. Like, this is one of the first times that we have a little bit more of a diversity within the running time. Cammie Gilbert from Oceans of Slumber comes on as Abby, and I do feel her coming in once in a while when she comes in as Abby, but I also feel like, again, it's when the star-studded cast is coming on to do like a B or C rated movie. I'm thinking of all these different metaphors to kind of bring in with this album. I feel like this would have been like everybody coming in, a star-studded cast of like a brilliant gothic like Jane Eyre or something like that, and then coming in and realizing that it's a Hammer horror. I do love Cammie's voice. I thought she was brilliant, but I do feel like she was restricted, and it felt very similar to a lot of the female singers that we have on this album, as well as past Ayreon albums. Like, she doesn't really differentiate herself all that much, outside of maybe a track here or there. Kind of speaking of that, Amanda Summerfield, as I've already mentioned before, she's playing the stepmother. She's the only other one that really kind of steps in onto her own. Like, Messages from Beyond is still one of my favorite tracks, as I've already mentioned, and her singing with Cammie do a really, really good job of blending all that together and really breathing life into this kind of lackluster story that we've had up until that point, especially with Messages from Beyond. I feel like that's a really good way of tying that all together. I also want to really mention the Furies that usually sing with Simone. So we've got Marcela Bravo, a Mexican singer of a Dutch band. I mean, how's that for diversity? The Dutch band of Mayan, as well as Caroline Westdrop, I believe that is, from the Charm the Fury. And what I appreciate of these two is that they provide kind of a chorus for Simone whenever she needs a little bit more of that powerhouse. Not that Simone ever needs any more powerhouse, but I also love their take within Get Out Now as being the Father's Fury. I do like that pairing. We've got the Fury of the Fates, the traditional Furies, but we also have the Father's Fury of Get Out. And so I really like that idea and that blending. Then we also have Joanne James, the drummer from Threshold. He also plays Abby's father, and he is unfortunately lost in the shuffle with a lot of these other individuals like Mike Mills. He plays the Roman statue, and the only reason why he stands out is because he's singing such a ridiculous track of Don't Ask Me, I'm Just Made of Stone. And then Paul Manzi from Cats in Space plays Henry, Daniel's brother, and again, he does get lost in the fold as well. So yeah, it's a shame that those that stand out only once or twice on the album. They don't really bring their own personalities to the forefront, especially from Tommy and Simone, who are, longtime veterans for Ayreon. And so kind of bringing this all to a fold, I do want to talk just a little bit about the actual presentation and packaging of this part as well. I feel like the album cover is the least inspiring of all the album covers that we've had from Ayreon, when he's got such lush and brilliant and vibrant album covers from Jeff Bertel's. Like, all of Jeff's paintings are brilliant. He's kind of like the Roger Dean for Yes of Ayreon's discography. And he hasn't been on the last 2 albums, and I think that's kind of from the detriment, because like, I wanted something really gothic and really dark with luscious atmospheres to really paint the picture for this album, and all we get is this very generic, very uninspiring album cover. I mean, on the one hand, it also initiates what we're going to get. Like, it does paint the picture really well for the music that's in it. And I also did appreciate the actual packaging that included the comic book. I thought that was a really interesting, I don't want to say gimmick, but add-on to the music to kind of help you tell the story and help follow it along. Even though I think this might be the most straightforward story that we've gotten from Ayreon to this point. So yeah, tying this all together, Transitus was kind of a mess, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's very uninspiring. There's so much missed opportunity, ill-spent talent. I did not really get into this. I mean, at least the music itself, if you just look at the music without the prestige that is Ayreon behind it, it's fine, but I wouldn't return to it. So yeah, I mean, my final rating for this one, unfortunately, has to be a skip. I wouldn't really invest time and energy into this one, especially with the runtime at being over 80 minutes long. I would honestly revisit some of his other works, you know? I would go back to the Human Equation. I would go back to the Theory of Everything. If you're really looking for that proggy stuff, I wouldn't turn to here. I really wouldn't. This one was a little bit of a disappointment and a major mess for me, which is kind of sad about that. Anyway, that's about it for Transitus by Ayreon. I was really trying to find some good things about this album, and I mean, Tom Baker was a star. Really loved his narration on this. Simone Simmons and Cammie Gilbert doing brilliant stuff on here. And I didn't even talk about Paul Manzi from Arena. But, oh well, what are you going to do? Oh yeah, the Furies were great. We got to give it up for the Furies. They were a lot of fun. So yeah, that's about it. What did you guys think of Transitus by Ayreon? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Oh, before I forget, because I always forget these things, I have a new podcast out. Go and check it out. It's Quid Prog Quo. I subject my friends and loved ones to progressive rock music, and they in turn get to subject me to any album of their choice. I'm having a blast with that, so go and check it out if you haven't already. And check out my Patreon. Why not? Follow me on social media, all that good stuff. Like, subscribe, comment, all that. I never say that on any of these videos, but there you go. All that is listed down below. All right, there we go. Thank you all for watching. You guys definitely are the best. And until next time, notes out.